The fine rain fell on the tin roof of the bus terminal, and Helen clutched the teddy bear to her chest as if it could shield her from the chill seeping into her bones. Her brown eyes, usually so full of light, now wandered through the empty waiting room, searching for faces that wouldn't return. She didn't understand what was happening. All she knew was that her children had said they were going to the restroom, and she believed them. As she always did, because that's what Helen did. She believed in the people she loved, even when that love wasn't deserved. Before we dive into this story, leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us which city you're joining us from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. It all began 3 weeks prior, on a Tuesday morning that seemed just like any other. Sunlight streamed through the gaps in the couple's bedroom curtains, and Anthony woke earlier than usual. Helen was still asleep beside him, the teddy bear tucked between her arms like a child. He lay there still, watching her for long minutes. He was 72 years old. And, for 4 decades, he had cared for that woman with a devotion few would understand. He met Helen when she was in her early 20s, at a church picnic in a small rural town. She wore a yellow dress and laughed at everything, with a pureness that disarmed him instantly. Back then, people gave strange looks to those interested in someone with Down syndrome. But Anthony was never one to follow the crowd. They married against almost everyone's wishes, and they built a simple life, but one full of affection. Helen couldn't have children, so they adopted 3. Richard, the oldest, who now worked as a manager at a home improvement store. Monica, the middle child, who constantly complained about life despite owning her own apartment and having a stable job. And Brian, the youngest, who fancied himself an entrepreneur but had never managed to keep a business afloat for more than 6 months. The 3 grew up with everything Anthony could give them, and what he couldn't, he found a way. He worked 2 jobs for years, put in overtime, sold raffle tickets, fixed neighbors' TVs. Also, his children would have an education, nice clothes, and food on the table. Helen, in her own way, contributed too. She cared for the house with a tenderness that transformed any corner into a home. Even without fully understanding some things about the world, she knew how to love. And that, Anthony always said, was more than many people who considered themselves smart. But the children grew up and moved out. First, Richard, who married young and soon stopped coming to Sunday lunches. Then Monica, who got a boyfriend and started to think visiting her parents was a waste of time. And finally Brian, who only ever showed up when he needed money. Anthony never complained out loud, but Helen noticed. She saw the sadness in his eyes every time the phone remained silent on Mother's Day, every time Christmas passed and no one showed up. She didn't understand why her children didn't visit anymore, and Anthony didn't have the heart to explain. On the morning of that Tuesday, he got up slowly, went to the kitchen, and prepared coffee as he always did. He brewed it calmly, poured it into a white mug Helen had painted years ago with crooked, colorful flowers, and brought it to her in bed. She woke up smiling, as always. She drank the coffee slowly, thanking him with each sip as if it were the first time. Anthony sat on the edge of the bed and held her hand. They stayed there in silence, listening to the birds outside. Neither of them knew that this would be their last breakfast together. Anthony went to the backyard to water the plants. It was a routine he had maintained for decades. He said talking to the flowers was good for the soul. He was crouching near the basil plant when he felt a sharp pain in his chest. He tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't obey. He fell to his side, dropping the watering can. Water spread across the dirt, and he lay there, looking at the sky, his breathing growing increasingly difficult. Helen appeared at the door a few minutes later, wondering about the delay. When she saw her husband fallen, she ran to him as best she could. She knelt beside him, called his name several times, shook his shoulder, but Anthony was already gone. His eyes were still open, fixed on a point beyond the clouds, as if he had seen something beautiful. Before he passed, Helen didn't scream, she didn't cry. She stayed there, holding his hand, talking softly as if he could still hear. The neighbors only realized something was wrong hours later, when they saw the front door was still open and no sound came from inside the house. Mrs. Martha, the neighbor from around the corner, was the first to enter. She found Helen still in the backyard next to the body, humming an old song Anthony used to sing to her before bed. The funeral took place 2 days later, in a small cemetery on the outskirts of town. All 3 children showed up, of course. Richard came in a suit, with the expression of someone who had more important things to do. Monica spent the entire time on her phone, responding to work messages. Brian arrived late, with red eyes, but not from crying. He'd spent the previous night drinking with friends. Helen was among them, holding the teddy bear, not quite understanding why they were putting Anthony in a box and throwing dirt over him. She asked repeatedly when he would return. No one had the courage to answer. After the funeral came the meeting. The 3 siblings sat in their parents' living room, with Helen in the bedroom watching television, and began to discuss what they would do going forward. Richard was the first to speak. He said he couldn't possibly take their mother to live with him. His wife wouldn't accept it. His children needed space, and besides, he worked too much to have time to care for someone with special needs. Monica immediately agreed. She said her apartment was small, she could barely take care of herself, and she didn't have the patience to deal with someone who needed constant attention. Brian, as always, stayed on the fence. He said he might try, but he was going through a difficult financial period and couldn't afford the costs. The silence that followed was heavy. The 3 looked at each other, and in that look was something none of them wanted to admit. None of them were willing to take responsibility. Helen, on the other side of the wall, hummed softly, oblivious to everything. She didn't know that, at that moment, the children she loved more than anything were deciding to get rid of her. It was Monica who came up with the idea. At first, she said it was just a possibility, something to think about, but as the days passed and Helen's presence became increasingly inconvenient, the idea took shape. They could take her to a distant city, leave her somewhere busy, and simply leave. Someone would find her, some institution would take care of her, and they would be free. Richard hesitated at first. He said it was risky, that it could cause problems. But Monica argued that no one would know. Helen wouldn't be able to explain where she came from. She didn't know her home address by heart, and if they chose a place far enough away, they would never be found. Brian, as always, followed the majority. He said he trusted his siblings' judgment. And so, on a Saturday morning, the 3 put Helen in the car, along with the teddy bear and a backpack with some clothes. They said they were going for a drive, to visit a beautiful place. She believed them. She smiled the whole way, looking out the window, pointing at the cows in the pastures and the birds in the sky. She didn't notice that her siblings barely spoke to each other. She didn't notice the nervousness in Richard's hands on the steering wheel. She didn't notice Monica's eyes, avoiding the rear-view mirror. She didn't notice anything, because Helen only knew how to see the best in people. They arrived at the bus terminal late in the afternoon. It was a big, noisy place, full of people coming and going. Helen was a little scared by the commotion, but her children said everything was fine. They sat her on a wooden bench near the snack bar, kissed her forehead, and said they were going to the restroom, that they'd be right back. That she should wait there quietly, holding the teddy bear, and she obeyed, as she always obeyed. Minutes passed, then hours. The sun began to set, and the orange light of dusk gave way to the grey of twilight. Helen was still there, on the same bench, with the teddy bear clutched to her chest. From time to time, she looked around, searching for her children. But they didn't return. She thought maybe they had gotten lost. She thought maybe the restroom was very far away. She thought of 1,000 explanations, because the last thing that would cross her mind was that her own children had left her behind. The rain began to fall when it was already night, fine at first, then heavier. Helen didn't move. She stayed there, sitting, letting the water run down her face, drenching her clothes, wetting the teddy bear. Some people passed by and looked, but no one stopped. She was just a strange old woman, they thought. She must be waiting for someone. It wasn't their problem. And Helen waited. She waited until her body trembled with cold. She waited until her eyes burned with exhaustion. She waited until the last bus departed. And the waiting room was almost empty. She waited because that's what her children had asked, and she never disobeyed her children. It was then that he appeared, a man in his 50s, with sun-weathered skin and calloused hands from work. He wore worn-out jeans, a faded T-shirt, and carried an old backpack on his back. His name was Gerald, but everyone called him Jerry. He was a street vendor, one of those who sell candy and water at traffic intersections. He had no fixed home, slept wherever he could, ate what he managed to get. Life hadn't been generous to him. But even so, something inside him hadn't hardened completely. Jerry saw Helen from a distance and immediately found it strange. An elderly woman alone, soaked, hugging a teddy bear, with her eyes lost in nothingness. He approached slowly, like someone approaching an injured bird. He crouched in front of her and asked in the softest voice he could muster if she was okay. Helen looked at him with those big, innocent eyes and said only one sentence that broke Jerry's heart in two. "My children went to the restroom. They'll be right back." He understood immediately. He didn't need anything else. He knew that kind of abandonment. He had seen it in dogs left on the road, in children forgotten at shelter doors, in old people abandoned on park benches. But he had never seen it in someone like her, in someone so fragile, so trusting, so incapable of imagining the world's cruelty. Jerry sat beside her on the wet bench. He said nothing for a while. He just stayed there, keeping her company, sharing the silence. Then, carefully, he took an old raincoat from his backpack and placed it over her shoulders. Helen looked at him in surprise, as if she didn't understand why a stranger was being kind. And in that look, Jerry saw something he hadn't seen in a long time. Purity. A purity that the world had tried to destroy, but which still stubbornly resisted deep in those brown eyes. "Come with me," he said softly. "I'll take you somewhere dry." Helen hesitated. She looked away, still waiting for her children. But something inside her, perhaps an ancient instinct for survival, told her that this man was trustworthy. She slowly stood up, still holding the teddy bear, and followed Jerry through the dark bus terminal. She didn't know where she was going. She didn't know what would happen. She only knew that for the first time that night, she was no longer alone. Jerry led Helen to an abandoned warehouse behind a vacant lot, about a 20-minute walk from the bus terminal. It wasn't much, but it was dry. There was an old mattress in a corner, some cardboard boxes that served as a table, and a blue tarp stretched across the ceiling to catch drips. That's where he slept when he was in that town. It wasn't home, but it was shelter. And that night, it would be enough. Helen entered slowly, looking around with curiosity. There was no fear on her face, just a silent strangeness, as if she was trying to understand a world so different from what she knew. Jerry lit a candle he kept in a tin can, and the orange light filled the space with dancing shadows. He offered the mattress to her and said he would sleep on the floor, on some cardboard. Helen immediately refused with her sweet manner, saying she didn't want to cause trouble. But Jerry insisted, and she ended up accepting more out of exhaustion than willingness. She lay down slowly, still hugging the teddy bear, and stared at the ceiling for a long time. Jerry sat in a corner, watching her in silence. He didn't know what to do with the situation. He didn't even know why he had brought her there. He just knew he couldn't sleep, knowing a person like her was alone in the rain, waiting for people who would never return. "What's his name?" Jerry asked suddenly, pointing to the teddy bear. Helen looked down, as if she had forgotten the toy was there. "Tony," she replied softly. "My husband gave him to me, a long time ago." "And where is your husband now?" The silence that followed was long. Helen clutched the teddy bear tighter and closed her eyes. "He went to heaven," she finally said. "The boys said he went to heaven and won't come back." Jerry felt a lump in his throat. He didn't ask any more questions. He just stayed there, watching over her sleep while the rain beat on the tin roof and the world outside went on indifferent. Meanwhile, miles away, the three siblings were gathered at Richard's house celebrating. Yes, celebrating. They had opened a bottle of wine saved for special occasions and toasted to what they called the solution to the problem. Monica was particularly satisfied. She said they could now move on, live their lives without that burden. Richard agreed, though with less enthusiasm. There was something inside him that bothered him, a pang of guilt he made sure to ignore. Brian, as always, just wanted to enjoy the moment. He drank more than he should and made tasteless jokes about the situation. "Imagine her face waiting," Brian said between laughs. "She's probably still there, poor thing." Monica slapped his arm, but also laughed. "Stop it. The important thing is that it worked out. No one will find out." Richard remained silent, swirling his glass. He thought of Helen sitting on that bench alone, understanding nothing. He thought of his father, who had dedicated his entire life to caring for her. He thought of how disappointed Anthony would be if he knew what they had done, but he quickly pushed those thoughts away. Dad was dead. He couldn't judge him anymore. And Helen, well, Helen would be fine. Someone would take care of her. There was always someone. Days passed, and the siblings' routine returned to normal. Richard immersed himself in work, using overtime as an excuse not to think. Monica resumed her social life, posting photos on Instagram as if nothing had happened. Brian continued jumping from project to project, always promising that the next one would be the one that worked out. None of them talked about their mother. It was as if she had never existed, as if all those years of living together could be erased with a simple decision. But there was one thing they didn't know, one thing Anthony had left behind that would soon come to light. In the abandoned warehouse, Helen and Jerry gradually got used to each other. It wasn't easy at first. She would wake up in the middle of the night calling for her children, confused, not knowing where she was. He had to calm her down, explain the situation again, even knowing she wouldn't remember the next day. It was a cycle that repeated every night. But little by little, something began to change. Helen started to recognize Jerry. Not as a substitute for her children, it would never be that, but as a constant presence, someone who was there when she needed him. He learned her tastes, her habits, the things that made her smile. He discovered that she loved coffee with milk, that she was afraid of thunder, that she liked to sing old songs while folding clothes. These were small details, but they made all the difference. Jerry, in turn, slowly opened up. He told Helen about his life, about how he had lost everything years ago because of a debt he couldn't pay. He told her about his ex-wife who left with their children, about the jobs that never lasted, about nights sleeping on the street. Helen listened attentively, even when she didn't fully understand. And in the end, she always said the same thing. "You are a good person, Jerry. God knows that." Those words, simple as they were, touched him deeply. It had been a long time since someone had told him he was good. It had been a long time since someone had looked at him without judgment, without pity, without disgust. Helen saw something in him that he himself had forgotten existed, and that, in some way, began to change things. They established a routine. In the morning, Jerry would go out to work at the intersections, selling candy, water, whatever he could get. Helen would stay in the warehouse, taking care of the few things they had, talking to Tony as if the teddy bear could answer. When Jerry returned at the end of the day, she would greet him with a huge smile, as if he had been gone for weeks. They would have dinner together, eating whatever he managed to bring, sometimes bread and bologna, sometimes a take-out meal someone had kindly given him, and then they would talk until sleep came. It was one of those nights that Jerry noticed something strange. Helen was quieter than usual, holding Tony in a different way, her fingers pressing into the bear's belly as if checking something. He asked what it was, and she hesitated before answering. "Tony holds a secret," she said softly. "Anthony put it in there. He said it was important." Jerry frowned, curious. "What kind of secret?" Helen shrugged. "I don't know. He told me never to take it out. He said it was to protect us." Jerry looked at the teddy bear with new eyes. It was an old toy, worn by time, with loose stitches in some places. But there was something there. He could feel it. Something Anthony had hidden. Something that might be more important than it seemed. "Do you want me to see what it is?" he asked carefully. Helen shook her head, pressing Tony against her chest. "No. Anthony said to keep it safe, so I will." Jerry respected her wishes. He didn't insist. But he kept thinking about it long after Helen fell asleep. What would a man hide inside a teddy bear? And why would it be so important enough to ask his wife never to remove it? Meanwhile, in the children's city, a letter arrived by mail. It was from the law firm handling Anthony's affairs. Richard was the first to open it, since the correspondence had come to his address. He read the contents in silence, and as his eyes scanned the lines, his face grew increasingly pale. The attorney informed them that, as determined by the late Anthony Miller during his lifetime, the official reading of the will would take place on the 15th of the following month at 10 in the morning at the main office. All heirs were required to be present, including the widow Helen Miller, whose presence was mandatory for the document's validation. Richard read that last passage 3 times, unable to believe it. Mandatory presence. Their mother had to be there. Without her, the will couldn't be opened. He called Monica immediately, then Brian. The 3 met that night, and the mood was completely different from their last meeting. There was no more wine, no more laughter, just desperation. "What do you mean, mandatory presence?" Monica repeated, pacing back and forth. "That makes no sense. We're his children. We're entitled to the inheritance." The attorney said, "It's a requirement of the will," Richard explained, trying to stay calm. "Dad must have included a specific clause. He probably wanted to ensure Mom was protected." Brian was sitting on the couch, his head in his hands. "Now what? We left her at a bus terminal 2 weeks ago. She could be anywhere. She could be dead, for crying out loud." "Don't say that," Monica snapped. "We have to find her. Simple as that." "Simple?" Richard raised his voice. "Do you realize what we did? If someone finds out, if she tells someone—" "She won't tell anything," Monica said, coldly. "You know, Mom, she doesn't understand these things. We just have to find her, invent a story, say it was a misunderstanding, and that's it. She'll believe us. She always believes." The cynicism in Monica's words was stomach-churning, but Richard and Brian had no moral ground to question her. They had agreed to the plan from the start. They were just as guilty as she was. That night, the 3 began to devise a plan to find Helen. They would return to the bus terminal where they left her, ask if anyone had seen her, search the surroundings. If necessary, they would hire a private investigator. The important thing was to bring her back before the will-reading date. The important thing was to secure the inheritance. None of them thought about how Helen was doing. None of them wondered if she had eaten, if she had slept, if she had cried. Their concern was purely financial. Love, if it had ever existed, had been completely replaced by greed. And while the children planned their search, driven by self-interest, Helen slept peacefully in the abandoned warehouse, lulled by the silent presence of a man who owed her nothing, but who had decided to care for her anyway. The teddy bear Tony was in her arms, guarding his secret, waiting for the right moment to reveal what Anthony had left behind. The rain had stopped outside, and for the first time in many nights, Helen smiled as she slept. Perhaps she was dreaming of her husband. Perhaps she was dreaming of happier times. Or maybe, just maybe, she was starting to understand that family isn't always made of blood. Sometimes, family is made of choice, of presence, of those who stay when everyone else leaves. Jerry looked at her sleeping and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. He had spent so much time just surviving that he had forgotten what it was like to truly live. To take care of someone, to worry about someone, to have someone to come home to at the end of the day. He didn't know how long this would last. He didn't know what the future held. He only knew that, as long as he could, he would protect that woman. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Because she deserved it. Because deep down, maybe he deserved a chance to be better too. The candle slowly flickered out, and the warehouse plunged into darkness. But it wasn't a frightening darkness. It was comforting, like an embrace. And in that silence, between two strangers whom fate had brought together, something new was being born, something that none of Helen's children would ever be able to understand. The simple and powerful beauty of unconditional affection, of care without expectation of return, of a kindness that exists just because it does. Outside, the stars began to appear in the clear sky, and somewhere perhaps Anthony was looking down, relieved to know that someone was taking care of his Helen, that she wasn't alone, that love, even when it seems to have ended, always finds a way to return. The sun rose lazily on that Thursday morning, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink that looked like they were from an old painting. Helen woke before Jerry, which was rare. She lay there on the mattress, looking at the warehouse ceiling, where light began to stream through the cracks. Tony was beside her, his button eyes staring at nothing, silently guarding his secrets. She stroked the worn fur of the teddy bear and sighed softly. She was thinking of Anthony, of the mornings they spent together in the backyard, tending to the plants, talking about everything and nothing. She missed the coffee he made, the smell of his soap when he came out of the shower, the way he held her hand when they crossed the street. They were small things, but now they seemed enormous. Jerry woke up to the sound of her moving. He slowly opened his eyes and saw her sitting, hugging her knees, her gaze lost somewhere distant. He didn't say anything immediately. He just observed. He had learned that Helen needed time to process things, that sometimes silence was more comforting than any words. "Good morning," he finally said, his voice still hoarse with sleep. Helen turned to him and smiled. That smile that seemed to illuminate everything around her, even in the midst of so much darkness. "Good morning, Jerry. I dreamed of Anthony today." "And what was the dream like?" She thought for a moment, searching for the right words. "Beautiful. We were dancing in the living room, playing that music he liked, that old one by a singer who's gone now." Jerry nodded, even without knowing which song it was. It didn't matter. What mattered was that she was smiling, that the dream had brought some peace to her heart. They got up together and began the day's routine. Jerry heated water on a makeshift stove he had set up with bricks and an old grate. He made weak coffee, more water than grounds, but it was what they had. Helen drank it without complaining, thanking him as if it were the best coffee in the world. Then, while he prepared to leave for work, she tidied the warehouse as best she could. She folded the mattress, organized the few clothes they had, swept the dirt floor with a broom Jerry had made from branches. It was her way of contributing, of feeling useful, of maintaining some normalcy in the midst of it all. "Will you come back?" she asked as he was leaving, with a hint of fear in her voice that broke his heart. Jerry stopped at the door and looked at her. "I always come back, Helen. Don't you worry." It was a simple promise, but it meant everything. Helen waved as he walked away, then went to sit in the sunny corner, with Tony on her lap, waiting for time to pass. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, the children were in full search operation. Richard had taken time off work, which was almost unheard of. Monica had cancelled all her week's appointments. Brian, for the first time in a long time, was participating in something without complaining. The three had returned to the bus terminal where they left Helen, but found nothing. No one remembered seeing an elderly woman with a teddy bear, or if they did remember, they didn't want to get involved. "This is ridiculous," Monica complained as they walked through the terminal for the 5th time. "Someone has to have seen her. A woman with Down syndrome doesn't go unnoticed." "Maybe she left," Brian suggested. "Maybe someone took her." "Took her where?" Richard asked, frustrated. "She doesn't know anyone here. She doesn't even know where she is." They decided to widen the search. They went to the local hospitals to ask if any patient with Helen's characteristics had been admitted. They went to shelters, police stations, churches that offered assistance to the homeless. Everywhere the answer was the same. "No, we haven't seen anyone like that." The siblings were growing desperate. The deadline for the will reading was approaching, and without their mother, all their effort would be in vain. It was Monica who had the idea to hire a private investigator. They found one online, a middle-aged man who looked like he had seen everything in life. They sat with him in a coffee shop and explained the situation, omitting, of course, the abandonment part. They said their mother had gotten lost during a trip, that she suffered from mental confusion, that they were desperate to find her. The detective listened with a neutral expression, jotting down information in a worn notebook. In the end, he asked for a photo of Helen and an advance payment. He said he would start investigating and would have news soon. The siblings left the coffee shop with a mix of hope and anxiety. It was the first concrete lead they had, the first effective action after days of fruitless searching. But they also knew they were playing with fire. If the detective discovered the truth, if someone connected the dots, they could face serious problems. Abandonment of a dependent adult was a crime. And no matter how much they tried to justify it to themselves, they knew they had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Back at the warehouse, the day passed slowly for Helen. She talked with Tony, sang old songs, took a nap in the middle of the afternoon. When the light began to turn golden, a sign that the sun was setting, she went to the entrance of the warehouse and looked out at the street, waiting for Jerry to return. It was a ritual she had created, a way to occupy her anxiety, to have something to look forward to. He appeared when the sky was already turning purple. He came with a plastic bag in his hand and a tired smile on his face. It had been a good day. He had managed to sell more than expected. He brought fresh bread from a bakery that was closing and had given him the leftovers. He also brought 2 apples that an elderly woman had given him as a gift when he told her he was taking care of a sick old lady. It wasn't a lie, he thought. It was almost true. Helen received him with her usual enthusiasm, as if it were a surprise that he had returned. They had dinner together, sitting on the floor, sharing the bread and apples as they talked about the day. Jerry told stories from the traffic intersections, of the people who passed without looking, of the few who stopped to buy and sometimes to chat. Helen listened attentively, asking questions, laughing at the right moments. She was a wonderful listener, perhaps because she never judged, never interrupted, never made the other person feel less. After dinner, they were silent for a while, just feeling each other's presence. The lit candle cast, shadows on the walls, and the sound of crickets outside created a soft soundtrack for the night. It was Helen who broke the silence, with a question that caught Jerry by surprise. "Why do you take care of me?" he thought before answering. It wasn't a simple question, and it deserved an honest answer. "I don't really know," he finally said. "I guess because you needed it, and I could help. But you didn't know me." "No, but I got to. And you're a good person, Helen. One of the best I've ever known." She was quiet, processing the words. Then she smiled in that way only she knew. "You're good too, Jerry. Anthony would have liked you." Jerry felt his eyes sting, but he didn't let the tears fall. How long had it been since someone had said something like that to him? How long since he had felt seen, valued, wanted? Life on the street had hardened him on the outside, but inside there was still something soft, something that responded to kindness with kindness. That night, while Helen slept, Jerry stayed awake, thinking. He thought about how strange life was, how such different paths could cross in, such an unlikely place. He thought of her children, these strangers who had been capable of abandoning their own mother. He felt anger, a dull anger burning in his chest. How could anyone do that? How could anyone look at a person like Helen and see a burden instead of a blessing? He also thought about the teddy bear, about the secret Anthony had hidden inside. His curiosity was great, but his respect was greater. If Helen said it was to be kept safe, then he would keep it with her. He wasn't going to force anything, wasn't going to invade that space. He would just be there, present, for as long as she needed him. Days passed and the routine solidified. Jerry worked, Helen waited, and the two met at the end of the day to share what life had offered. It wasn't much, but it was enough. They had food, they had shelter, they had companionship. For those who had nothing, it was almost a luxury. Helen adapted to her new life with a resilience that surprised Jerry. She didn't complain, she didn't cry, she didn't ask about her children anymore. It was as if she had accepted, deep in her heart, that they weren't coming back. Or maybe it was just a defense mechanism, a way to protect her own sanity. Jerry couldn't tell. He just knew she seemed to be at peace, and that was what mattered. But the peace wouldn't last forever. The world outside was moving, gears turning, people searching. The detective hired by the children was good at what he did. He had years of experience, contacts in all the cities in the region, a keen nose for finding those who didn't want to be found, and he was getting close, closer than anyone imagined. On a Tuesday morning, Richard's phone rang. It was the detective. He said he had a lead, that someone had seen an elderly woman with Helen's characteristics in a town 2 hours away. She was in the company of a man, apparently a homeless person. They were living together in an abandoned warehouse near the industrial park. Richard almost dropped the phone. He couldn't believe they had found her. He called his siblings immediately, and the three arranged to go there the next day. They would drive, all three together, to bring their mother back. They would invent a story, say they had looked for her everywhere, that they were desperate with longing. Helen would believe them. She always believed. What they didn't know was that Jerry wouldn't give Helen up so easily, that he had developed a real affection for that woman, a sense of protection that went beyond logic, that he was willing to fight for her, even if it meant facing her own children. Because sometimes, he thought, blood family is the one that hurts the most, and chosen family is the one that heals the most. The night before the children arrived was like any other. Helen and Jerry had dinner together, chatted a little, and went to bed early. She had no idea what was coming. She didn't know that the past was about to knock on their door. She didn't know that she would have to choose between those who abandoned her and those who took her in. She slept peacefully, with Tony in her arms, dreaming perhaps of Anthony, perhaps of her children, perhaps of a place where no one had to choose anything. Jerry, however, slept poorly. He had confused nightmares with unknown faces and accusatory voices. He woke several times during the night, sweating cold, his heart racing. He couldn't explain why, but he felt that something was about to happen, something big, something that would change everything. And he was right. Change was coming. In a black car that at that moment was crossing the dark road, bringing 3 people who didn't deserve the title they carried. 3 children who only remembered their mother when she could give something in return. 3 strangers, dressed as family, ready to claim what was never theirs. The dawn advanced slowly, and when the first lights of morning began to clear the horizon, Helen's fate was already sealed. All that remained was to discover which way the scales would tip, whether towards those who truly loved or towards those who only knew how to pretend. The black car pulled onto the dirt road a little after 9 in the morning. Richard turned off the engine and stared at the warehouse ahead, trying to process what he saw. It was a deplorable place, he thought. Unfinished brick walls, a rusty tin roof, weeds growing all around. He couldn't believe their mother was in there, living like a vagrant, sleeping God knows where. He felt a pang of something that might have been guilt, but quickly pushed it away. This wasn't the time for that. They had a mission to accomplish. Monica was in the back seat, touching up her makeup in a compact mirror. She wanted to be presentable, in case she needed to convince Helen of anything. Brian, beside her, tapped his foot with anxiety. He was nervous, more so than the others. Perhaps because deep down he was the only one who still had a shred of conscience. Or perhaps he was just afraid it would go wrong. "Shall we?" Richard asked, already opening his door. The 3 got out of the car and walked towards the warehouse. Richard's dress shoes sank into the soft dirt, and he grimaced in distaste. Monica followed behind, arms crossed, looking around as if entering enemy territory. Brian came last, dragging his feet, wanting to be anywhere but there. Jerry saw them coming before they saw him. He was sitting on a crate near the entrance, finishing his breakfast, when he noticed the movement in the street. 3 well-dressed people, clearly outsiders, approaching with determined steps. He knew immediately who they were. He didn't need an introduction. He just had to look at their faces, at the arrogance in their stride, at the way of people who think they can show up and take whatever they want. He slowly stood up, tossing the rest of his coffee, and went to meet them. He stopped in front of the warehouse, blocking the entrance, arms crossed, and an expression that left no doubt. Passing him wouldn't be easy. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. Richard stepped forward, assuming the role of spokesman. "We're looking for our mother, Helen Miller. We know—" "She's here!" Jerry didn't move. "And who are you?" "We're her children," Monica replied, impatient. "She disappeared a few weeks ago and we finally managed to find her. We've come to take her home." Their audacity was impressive. Jerry looked at the 3, trying to find some trace of shame, some sign of remorse. He found nothing. He only saw people wanting to solve a problem, like someone coming to retrieve a lost item. "Disappeared?" he repeated, a hint of irony in his voice. "Are you sure that's how you want to tell the story?" Richard frowned, suspicious. "What do you mean by that?" "I mean, Helen told me what happened. She told me her children took her to a bus terminal, sat her on a bench, and left. She told me she waited for hours, in the rain, until I found her soaked and cold. That's not disappearing. That's abandoning." The silence that followed was heavy as lead. The 3 siblings exchanged glances, not knowing what to say. They hadn't expected this. They hadn't expected someone to know, someone to accuse them so directly. Monica was the first to recover. "Look, I don't know what she told you, but our mother has problems. She confuses things, invents stories. What happened was a misunderstanding. We got separated at the bus terminal and couldn't find her again. It was an accident." Jerry almost laughed. The nerve was astounding. "An accident that took you weeks to resolve. An accident that made you leave her alone in a strange town, without money, without a phone, without anything." "We searched," Richard interjected, trying to sound convincing. "We looked everywhere. We even hired a detective. We were desperate." Desperate for what? Jerry asked. For your mother? Or for the inheritance she represents? That was a punch to the gut. The three recoiled a step, caught by surprise. How did he know? Had Helen told him? Or was it just a lucky guess? I don't know what you're talking about, Monica said, but her voice trembled slightly. I know you don't know, Jerry replied calmly, but I do. Helen may not understand much, but she remembers her father saying he arranged everything to protect her. She remembers him talking about a will, about an attorney, about important things. And I may be uneducated, but I'm not stupid. I can put two and two together. You show. Up now after weeks, right around the time there's probably something to sign. Coincidence, huh? Richard stepped forward, trying to assert authority. Listen here. I don't know who you think you are, but Helen is our mother. We have the right to take her with us. If you try to stop us, we'll call the police. Jerry was not intimidated. Go ahead and call them. It'll be interesting to explain to them how an elderly woman with special needs ended up alone at a bus terminal a couple 100 miles from home. It'll be even more interesting when Helen tells her side of the story, because no matter how much you think she doesn't understand anything, she understands enough to know that her children left her behind. The standoff was set. On one side, 3 children driven by self-interest, armed with justifications and lies. On the other, a man who had nothing but the conviction that he was doing the right thing. In the middle, still inside the warehouse, Helen, who had woken up to the voices and was sitting on the mattress, hugging Tony, trying to understand what was happening. "Mum!" Brian's voice broke the silence. He had skirted around Jerry and was looking into the warehouse, into Helen's eyes, which stared back at him with a mix of recognition and confusion. "Mom, it's me. Brian. We've come to get you." Helen looked at her son for a long moment. Then she looked at Jerry, who had turned to watch the scene. There was something in her eyes that was difficult to decipher. It wasn't joy, it wasn't anger, it was something deeper, sadder. It was the pain of someone who loves too much to hate, but has suffered too much to trust. "Brian?" she said softly, her voice fragile as paper. He entered the warehouse, crouching to her level. "It's me, Mom. We've come to take you home. You don't have to stay here anymore." Helen looked around, at the warehouse that had been her home for the past few weeks, at the mattress where she slept, at Jerry's things scattered in the corner, at the tin can with the melted candle. It wasn't much, but it had been good. It had been safe. It had been a place where someone truly cared for her. "And Jerry?" she asked. Brian frowned, not understanding. "Who?" "Jerry. He takes care of me. He's my friend." "Mom, you don't need him anymore. You have us now, your real family." Those words hurt more than Brian could imagine. Real family. Helen repeated softly, testing the sound, trying to find the meaning. Was real family the one that left her in the rain? Was real family the one that only showed up when they needed something? Who was real family? Jerry entered the warehouse slowly, ignoring the glances of Richard and Monica, who had stayed outside. He went to Helen and knelt on the other side of the mattress, creating an almost symbolic image, the blood sun on one side, the chosen caretaker on the other, and Helen in the middle, having to decide. "Helen," Jerry said gently, "you don't have to decide anything right now. If you want to go with them, I understand. They're your children. But if you want to stay, I'm here. You'll always have a place with me." Brian looked at Jerry with a mixture of irritation and disbelief. Who did this homeless man think he was? What right did he have to meddle in their family, to confuse their mother? "Mom, let's go," he insisted, taking her arm. "We have a lot to sort out. Dad left some things arranged, and we need you to—" He stopped mid-sentence, realizing he had said too much. Jerry raised an eyebrow, almost smiling. It was exactly what he expected. The truth always slipped out when the pressure mounted. Helen, however, didn't seem to notice. She was busy looking from one to the other, trying to process it all. The world had become too confusing, full of people wanting things, saying things, asking for things. She just wanted peace. She just wanted to go back to the time when Anthony was alive and everything made sense. "I want to see Anthony," she said suddenly, with a clarity that surprised everyone. "I want to go where he is." Brian and Jerry exchanged glances, not knowing how to respond. Helen sometimes forgot her husband had died. It was a defense mechanism, a way to deal with a loss too great to process all at once. On good days, she remembered and cried softly. On difficult days, she asked for him, as if he would return at any moment. "Mum," Brian began, in the gentlest voice he could muster. "Dad, he can't any more. No, he died," Helen cut him off, surprising them again. "I know, I remember, but I want to go to the place where he is, to the cemetery. It's been a long time since I visited him." It was a simple request, but it complicated the siblings' plans. They wanted to take Helen home, prepare her for the will reading, keep everything under control. A visit to the cemetery was not in their plans. "We can go later, Mom," Brian said. "First we'll go home, you rest a bit, and then—" "No," Helen said firmly. "I want to go now. I want to talk to Anthony." Jerry watched the scene in silence. There was something different about Helen at that moment, a strength he hadn't seen before, as if the presence of her children had awakened something inside her, some dormant resistance. "If Helen wants to go to the cemetery, perhaps you should take her," Jerry suggested, looking at Brian. "Then you can talk about the rest." Brian looked back, seeking support from his siblings. Richard nodded impatiently. The sooner they resolved this, the better. Monica rolled her eyes but didn't protest. "Okay, Mom," Brian said, standing up. "We'll take you to the cemetery, but then we're going home, agreed?" Helen nodded slowly, but didn't seem to be truly listening. She was thinking of Anthony, of what she would say to him, of the questions she wanted to ask. She got up with difficulty, holding Tony as always, and walked to the warehouse exit. As she passed Jerry, she stopped and looked at him. "Are you coming with me?" she asked. Her children exchanged glances, horrified at the possibility. But before they could protest, Jerry answered, "If you want me to, I will." Helen smiled, that pure smile only she had. "I do. You're my friend." And so, in a way no one expected, the five got into the black car heading for the cemetery. Richard drove with tense hands on the steering wheel. Monica in the front seat, arms crossed, pretending Jerry didn't exist. Brian and Helen in the back seat, with Jerry squeezed on the other side, looking out the window. Tony was on Helen's lap, his button eyes reflecting the sunlight, guarding his secret in silence. The drive was almost silent, only the sound of the engine and the wind entering through the half-open window. Helen was quiet, lost in thought, preparing to reunite with her husband in a way only she understood. And no one there, neither her children nor Jerry, had any idea what was coming, of what Anthony had left behind, of how much that teddy bear would change all their lives. The cemetery lay on a gentle hill on the outskirts of town, surrounded by white walls that time had stained with moss. The entrance was an iron gate with a cross on top, and just beyond it, a small chapel where masses for the dead were sometimes held. It was a silent place, one of those that make you speak softer even without meaning to, as if words might awaken those resting beneath the earth. Richard parked the car near the entrance, and everyone got out. Helen walked ahead, with a determination that surprised her children. She knew exactly where to go, as if her feet remembered the way, even when her mind forgot other things. Jerry followed close behind, maintaining a respectful distance, but near enough to help if she needed it. The three siblings came last, exchanging impatient glances, wanting it all to be over quickly. Anthony's grave was in a simpler area of the cemetery, far from the ornate mausoleums of the wealthy. It was a grey granite headstone, with his name engraved in golden letters, his birth and death dates, and a phrase he himself had chosen years ago when he was still healthy. "True love doesn't die, it merely waits." Helen stopped in front of the headstone and stood in silence for a long time, looking at her husband's name as if she could see him through the stone. "Hi, Anthony," she finally said, her voice soft and sweet. "Sorry for the delay. So much has happened." Her children stood back uncomfortable. They didn't know what to do with the scene, with that intimacy between their mother and their deceased father. Jerry moved a little closer, respecting the moment, but wanting to be near if Helen needed support. "The boys came to get me," Helen continued, still speaking to the headstone. "They said they're going to take care of me now. But you know, Anthony, I don't know if I believe them. It's been a long time since they took care of anything. It's been a long time since they even showed up. You remember how it was, right? We waited so long, and they never came." Richard closed his eyes, feeling the words like needles. Monica crossed her arms tighter, her jaw clenched. Brian looked at the ground, unable to meet her gaze. "But Jerry took care of me," Helen said, turning slightly to where he stood. "He found me when I was alone, scared, not knowing what to do. He gave me food, gave me a place to sleep, gave me company. He's good, Anthony. You would have liked him." Jerry felt his eyes sting, but he held firm. This wasn't the time to falter. Helen turned back to the headstone and bent down a little, as if to tell a secret. "I kept Tony safe, you see. I didn't let anyone touch him. You said he was important, so I protected him. But you know, Anthony, sometimes I wonder if it's not time to open him, if it's not time to see what you left for me." The siblings exchanged glances, suddenly much more attentive. Tony, the teddy bear? What had their father left inside it? Helen slowly stood up and turned to her children. There was something different in her gaze, a momentary clarity that sometimes appeared, as if a veil had been temporarily lifted. "Do you want to know what your father hid?" she asked. "Do you want to know why he said I could never be separated from Tony?" Monica took a step forward, barely able to hide her anxiety. "Of course we do, Mom. Did Dad leave something important?" Helen looked at her for a moment, and in that look was more understanding than her children imagined. She might not understand everything, but she understood enough. She understood that this sudden interest wasn't about her, but about what she might have. "Anthony was always smart," Helen said, caressing the teddy bear. "He knew things. He knew there would be people who would want what was his without deserving it, so he hid it inside here." With trembling hands, she began to open the stitching on the bear's belly. The stitches were loose, worn by time, and gave way easily. From inside, she pulled out a plastic bag folded several times, protecting its contents. The children crowded closer, almost pushing each other to see better. Jerry remained where he was, watching with a mixture of curiosity and concern. Helen opened the bag and took out 2 papers. One was an old yellow document with stamps and signatures. The other was a handwritten letter in Anthony's neat handwriting. "This here," Helen said, showing the document, "is the deed to a house. Anthony bought it a long time ago before you were born. It was supposed to be a surprise," he said. "Something to protect me if anything happened to him." Richard snatched the document from her hands, unceremoniously, his eyes scanning the lines. It was true, a property deed registered with the county clerk in the name of Helen Miller. House in the countryside, in a small town he had never heard of. Apparently, his father had made this investment decades ago when prices were different and had never told anyone. "There's a house?" Monica said, incredulous. "Dad bought a house and never said anything?" "He said it was a secret," Helen explained, not seeming disturbed by her children's reaction. "He said he would tell me when the time was right, but then he left before that." Brian was reading the letter over Richard's shoulder. It was a letter from Anthony to Helen, written with an overflowing tenderness in every word. It explained about the house, about why he had kept it a secret, about how he wanted Helen to always have a place of her own, just hers, no matter what happened. And at the end, there was a paragraph that made the three siblings lose all color. "The will I left with the attorney," Anthony had written, "has a special clause. It will only be valid if you are present at the reading, being cared for with dignity by the family. If the children are not taking proper care of you, if they have mistreated or abandoned you, the attorney has instructions to investigate. And in that case, everything I accumulated will go to charities. Everything. Because inheritance is not a right, it is a responsibility. And whoever does not care for those in need does not deserve to receive anything." The silence that followed was absolute. Richard dropped the letter as if it burned him. Monica's mouth was open, unable to process. Brian stepped back a few paces, his legs shaky. "Dad knew," Richard murmured, more to himself than to the others. "The old man knew this could happen." Jerry, who had heard everything, felt a deep admiration for Anthony. That man, even dead, was still protecting his wife. He had thought of everything, foreseen the worst scenarios, created safeguards against his own family. It was impressive. Helen carefully put the papers back in the bag. "Anthony was very smart," she said with pride in her voice. "He always took care of me, even when he's no longer here." Monica recovered first, as she always did. "Mum, we need to talk about this. This house, this will... These are serious things. We need to understand it properly." "Understand what?" Helen asked, genuinely confused. "The responsibilities, the documents, the deadlines. We can't leave these things unresolved. The attorney needs to know that we are taking care of you, that everything is fine." The hypocrisy was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Jerry couldn't take it anymore. "Taking care of her?" he interrupted, his voice controlled but firm. "You abandoned her at a bus terminal. You left her to die of cold and hunger, and now you want to convince her you're taking care of her." Richard turned to him, his face red with anger. "This is none of your business. You're not part of this family." "No, I'm not," Jerry agreed. "But I was the only one there when she needed someone. I was the only one who didn't treat her like a problem to be solved. So forgive me if I can't stay quiet watching you try to manipulate her again." "Jerry," Helen called, her voice soft, "it's okay. I know what I'm doing." Everyone turned to her, surprised. There was a firmness in Helen's gaze that hadn't been there before, as if the visit to Anthony's grave, the discovery of the papers, the memory of everything her husband had done for her had awakened something dormant. "I know you want the inheritance," she said, looking at her children one by one. "I know that's why you came to get me. I'm not that stupid." Monica opened her mouth to protest, but Helen raised her hand, asking for silence. "Anthony explained things to me," she continued. "He explained many times, so I wouldn't forget. He said I didn't need to be afraid, that he had arranged everything. He said if I ever felt abandoned, I just had to show this letter to the attorney, that he would know what to do." Richard's face turned ashen. "Mum, you're not going to do this. We're your family, your children." "Children who left me alone," Helen replied, and there was a profound sadness in those words. "Children who treated me like a burden. Do you think I didn't feel it? Do you think I didn't see your faces when Dad died, wanting to know who was going to take me? Do you think I didn't hear you talking, deciding where to dump me?" Brian started to cry again. He couldn't hold it in anymore. The shame, the guilt, everything came at once, crushing him like a wave. "Mom, I'm sorry," he sobbed. "I didn't mean to, I swear I didn't. But Monica said it was the only solution, and Richard agreed, and I—" "Brian, shut up," Monica snapped, furious. "No, let him speak," Helen said. "Let him speak, because I want to hear. I want to understand why my children, whom I loved my whole life, decided to throw me away like trash." The cemetery fell silent. Only the sound of the wind in the trees and Brian's sobs broke the quiet. Jerry watched it all silently, feeling that he was witnessing something too intimate, but unable to leave. Richard tried one last card. "Mom, we made a mistake, a big mistake, but we can fix it. It can be different from now on. You come live with us, we'll take good care of you and—" "No," Helen said simply. "I don't want to live with you." "But Mom, I want to go to the house Anthony bought, the house he saved for me. I want to live there, in my own space, with my things, and I want Jerry to come with me." Everyone looked at Jerry, who seemed as surprised as the others. "Helen," he said, his voice cracking, "I don't know if—" "You said I would always have a place with you," Helen reminded him. "Now I'm saying you'll always have a place with me, in my house, if you want." It was an absurd proposition, thinking about it. A woman with Down syndrome inviting a homeless man to live with her in a house she didn't even know well. But at the same time, it made all the sense in the world. Two people whom life had hurt, finding each other at the right moment, deciding to continue together. Jerry looked at Helen, at her brown eyes full of hope, and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a future. Not a day-to-day survival, but a real future, with a roof, with company, with purpose. "I want to," he said softly. "If you want, I want to too." Helen smiled, that smile that illuminated everything. Then she turned to Anthony's grave one last time. "See," she said to the headstone, "everything worked out. You said it would, and it did. Thank you for taking care of me, even from afar. I'll love you forever." And without looking at her children, she began to walk back to the car with Jerry beside her, leaving Richard, Monica, and Brian standing among the graves, certain that they had lost much more than an inheritance. They had lost their mother's respect. They had lost their dignity. They had lost everything that money could never buy back. The will reading took place on a grey Monday, one of those days that seemed to carry the weight of the world in low-hanging clouds. The attorney's office was in an old building downtown, with worn marble stairs and hallways that echoed every step. Helen arrived first, accompanied by Jerry, who had bought a new shirt at the flea market for the occasion. It was nothing fancy, a blue plaid button-down, but it was clean, pressed, and made him look like a different person. Or perhaps it was simply him, finally, after so many years, hiding beneath worn-out clothes. The children arrived later, each in their own car, avoiding eye contact. The past few weeks had been a living hell for them. After the scene at the cemetery, they had tried everything to convince Helen to change her mind. Calls, visits, gifts, promises. But she remained firm, with a determination no one expected. She had gone to see the house Anthony had bought, a simple but well-maintained property in a small country town, surrounded by greenery, with a large yard and a porch to watch the sunset. She had fallen in love with it instantly. That's where she wanted to live, and that's where Jerry would live with her. The attorney was a man in his 60s, bald, with thick-rimmed glasses and a deliberate way of speaking that conveyed reassurance. His name was Attorney Miller, and he had been Anthony's friend for over 30 years. They had grown up together, studied together, and when Anthony needed someone trustworthy to keep his most important documents, he turned to him. Everyone sat around a large, dark wood table. Helen sat at one end, with Jerry beside her. The three children sat at the other end, separated by a tension almost visible in the air. Attorney Miller sat at the head of the table, arranged some papers in front of him, and cleared his throat before beginning. "Before reading the will," he said, looking at each person present, "I need to explain a few things. Anthony came to me about 5 years ago to update his documents. He was concerned about Helen's future and wanted to ensure she would be protected no matter what happened. During our conversations, he confided his worries about his children. It is not my place to judge anyone here, but I need you to know that Anthony left very specific instructions." Richard shifted in his chair, uncomfortable. Monica maintained a neutral expression, but her clasped hands in her lap betrayed her. Brian was pale, looking at the floor. "The will contains several clauses," Attorney Miller continued. "Some are conditional, meaning they depend on certain circumstances being met. Anthony was very clear about what he expected and about the consequences if his expectations were not fulfilled." He picked up the document and began to read aloud. Most of it was legal jargon, difficult for non-professionals to follow. But the main points gradually became clear. Anthony had left the family home to Helen with lifetime usufruct. This meant she could live there until she died, but she could not sell it. After her, the house would go to charity. The children would have no claim to that property. In addition, Anthony had a considerable savings, accumulated over decades of hard work. This money would be divided into 2 parts. The first part, equivalent to 70% of the total, would be placed in a fund administered by the attorney, exclusively for Helen's care. Payment for caregivers, medical expenses, food, everything she needed. The second part, the remaining 30%, would be divided among the children, but there was a condition. "This division shall only be effected," Attorney Miller read, "if the heirs demonstrate in a proven manner that they cared for Helen Miller with dignity and respect during the period between my death and the opening of this will. Otherwise, the entirety of the funds shall be allocated to charitable institutions chosen by me during my lifetime." The silence that followed was deafening. The 3 siblings exchanged glances, panic growing in their eyes. They were afraid to ask, but they needed to know. "And how is this proven?" Richard asked, his voice cracking. Attorney Miller took off his glasses and looked directly at him. "Anthony left me instructions to investigate the circumstances in which Helen was found at the time of the will's reading. For this purpose, I hired a private investigator several weeks ago." Richard's heart almost stopped. Was it the same detective they had hired, or another? How much did the attorney know? "The investigator submitted a detailed report to me," Attorney Miller continued, picking up a folder and opening it. "It contains witness statements, security camera footage from the bus terminal, and an interview with Mr. Gerald here present, who found Helen abandoned and cared for her during the weeks when her children did not appear." Monica turned ashen. This is the truth," the attorney cut in. "You abandoned your mother. You left her alone, vulnerable, without resources. If it weren't for a stranger, who showed more compassion than her own children, she could have died of cold, hunger, or any danger she encountered on the streets." Brian started to cry again. It seemed that was all he knew how to do lately. Richard was static, processing the implications. Monica, for the first time, had no answer. "Given this evidence," Attorney Miller declared, putting his glasses back on, "I am fulfilling the instructions left by Anthony. The inheritance intended for the children will be entirely redirected to charitable institutions. Specifically, half will go to an organization that cares for people with disabilities, and the other half to a shelter for abandoned seniors. Anthony was very specific about this. He said that if his children didn't know how to care for those in need, then the money would go to those who did." The irony was cruel, but just. Money that would have been used by people who abandoned going to people who welcomed. Anthony, even dead, was teaching a lesson his children would never forget. "You can't do this," Monica said, standing up. "We have rights. We are legitimate heirs." "Heirs who failed the conditions set by the testator," Attorney Miller replied calmly. "Anthony had every right to impose conditions on his inheritance. You did not meet them. The consequences are stipulated in a document registered with the county clerk. If you wish to contest, you may hire an attorney, but I warn you that your chances of success are minimal." Anthony thought of everything. Richard stood up too, his face contorted with rage. "This is a trap. The old man set all this up to screw us over." "The old man," Helen spoke for the first time since they had entered the room, "loved you more than you deserved. He cried every Christmas. You didn't come. He kept your photos in his wallet, showed them to friends with pride. He wanted you to be good people. And when he saw that perhaps you weren't, he tried to protect the one he loved most. To protect me from you." Helen's words fell like stones into water, creating ripples that spread through the silence. She wasn't shouting, she wasn't accusing, she was just speaking the truth, with that clarity that sometimes appeared, coming from somewhere deep where Down syndrome couldn't reach. "I love you," she continued. "Always have. Since the day you came home, Tiny, crying from hunger. I sang you to sleep, I cooked for you, I took care of you when you were sick. It wasn't easy for me, you know. I'm not like other mothers. But I did the best I could. And you left me on a bus terminal bench like I was an old dog no one wanted anymore." Brian sobbed louder. Monica looked away, unable to face her mother. Richard remained standing, but his shoulders had slumped, the anger giving way to something that might have been the beginning of regret. "I forgive you," Helen said, and there was a sincerity in those words that hurt to hear, because that's what you do when you love. You forgive, but forgiving isn't forgetting, and it's not letting yourself be hurt again. So I'm going to live in my house with Jerry, and I'm going to live the rest of my time in peace. If you want to visit me, you can come, but don't expect me to trust you again. Trust is something you build, not demand." She slowly stood up, leaning on Jerry's arm. Tony was in her other hand, faithful as ever. She walked to the office door without looking back. "Helen," Attorney Miller called before she left, "there's one more thing." She stopped and turned, curious. "Anthony left a letter for you. He asked me to deliver it personally, in everyone's presence, at the end of the will reading." He stood up and went to Helen, handing her a manila envelope with her name written on the front, in Anthony's neat handwriting. Helen took the envelope carefully, as if it were made of crystal. "Can I open it later?" she asked. "Of course, it's yours. Do as you prefer." Helen nodded, placed the envelope in the purse Jerry had bought for her the previous week, and walked out of the office with her head held high. Jerry went with her, closing the door behind them, leaving the three siblings alone with the attorney and the weight of their own choices. Outside, the sun had decided to appear through the clouds, casting rays of light on the wet sidewalk. Helen paused for a moment, looking at the sky, feeling the warmth on her face. "Are you okay?" Jerry asked, concerned. She smiled, in that way only she had. "I am. I'm fine for the first time. In a very long time." They walked together to the bus stop, two strangers whom fate had transformed into family. Anthony's letter waited in the purse, holding the last words of a man who had loved too much and protected until the end. Helen still didn't know what was written in it, but she knew that, whatever it was, it would be good, because everything that came from Anthony was good. The bus arrived and they boarded, sitting on a seat near the window. The city faded behind them as they headed towards the new life that awaited them. A house in the countryside, a yard with fruit trees, a porch to watch the sunset. It wasn't much, but it was more than enough. It was home. It was peace. It was everything Helen had ever wanted, and which finally, after so much suffering, was within reach. And as the bus swayed gently on the road, Helen leaned her head on Jerry's shoulder and closed her eyes. She was tired, but it was a good tiredness. The tiredness of someone who had weathered a storm and reached the other side. The tiredness of someone who could finally rest. Jerry looked at her sleeping and felt a gratitude that couldn't be contained in his chest. That woman, whom the world had mistreated in so many ways, had offered him something no one else had, a place to belong, a purpose to wake up to every day, a reason to be better. And he would honor that. He would take care of her until the end, not out of obligation but by choice, because that's what real family did. It chose to be there. It chose to love. It chose to stay when everyone else left. The sun continued to shine outside, and the future, for the first time in a long time, seemed full of possibilities. The house stood at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by mango and cherry trees that provided shade all day long. It was a simple structure, bare brick painted white, with blue windows and a porch overlooking a horizon of green hills. The yard was large, with a laundry tub in one corner, a clothesline stretched between two trees, and a garden patch that was begging to be tended. It was exactly the kind of place Anthony dreamed of for Helen, a refuge away from the noise, where she could live at her own pace, unhurried, without judgment. Helen and Jerry arrived late on a Friday afternoon, after a bus trip that lasted almost 4 hours. They were tired, sweaty, but there was a joy in the air that compensated for any discomfort. The nearest neighbor, Mr. Johnson, a 70-year-old man who had lived there since birth, had left the house open and prepared, at Attorney Miller's request. He had even placed flowers on the kitchen table, a welcoming gesture that touched Helen deeply. She entered slowly, looking at every corner with wide, wondering eyes. The living room was small but cozy, with an old floral sofa, a coffee table, and an antique television that probably no longer worked. The kitchen had a wood-burning stove and wooden cabinets painted green. The bedroom had a double bed with a new mattress, a 2-door wardrobe, and a window that overlooked the backyard. It was simple, it was humble, but it was hers. Only hers. "It's beautiful," she said to Jerry, who was standing in the doorway. "Anthony chose well." Jerry smiled, agreeing. He really did. He thought of everything, didn't he? Helen nodded, running her hand along the wall as if she could feel her husband's presence within the walls. "He always thought, ever since we got married, he said he'd give me a house just for us, where no one could bother us. I thought it was just a dream, but it was true." They spent the rest of the afternoon exploring the place. They discovered a well at the back of the yard, with clean, fresh water. They discovered an empty chicken coop that Jerry was already planning to refill. They discovered a cherry tree laden with ripe fruit, and Helen ate until she couldn't anymore, with red juice running down her chin, laughing like a child. When the sun began to set, painting the sky orange and pink, the two sat on the porch to watch the spectacle. There was a silence there that was different from the city's silence. A silence full of sounds, crickets chirping, birds settling in, wind in the mango leaves. It was the sound of peace. It was the sound of home. "Jerry," Helen said suddenly, her voice low, "I want to read the letter." He looked at her, understanding. "Do you want me to stay? Or would you rather be alone?" She thought for a moment. "Stay. You're family now." She took the envelope from her purse with trembling hands. Her name was written on the front, in Anthony's handwriting that she knew so well. For a moment, she just held it, feeling the weight of the paper, trying to find the courage to open it. Finally, Carefully, she tore the edge of the envelope and pulled out the letter. It was a single sheet, written on both sides, in the same neat calligraphy she had seen so many times over the years. "My Helen," she began to read aloud, slowly, stumbling over some more difficult words. "If you are reading this, it's because I've already passed on. And if you are reading this in the presence of others, it's because the moment I so feared and so prepared myself to face has arrived." Jerry listened in silence, respecting the moment. "I met you when you were 22 and wore a yellow dress at the summer festival. You laughed at everything, Helen. You laughed at the clown, you laughed at the music, you laughed at me when I tripped trying to ask you to dance. And I thought, this woman is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen in my life. Not because you were beautiful on the outside, though you were, but because you were beautiful on the inside, beautiful in a way the world couldn't spoil." Helen paused, her eyes filled with tears. She took a deep breath and continued. "Everyone said I was crazy to marry you. They said you wouldn't be able to take care of a house, of children, of me. They said I would regret it. But you know what, Helen? I never regretted it. Not for a second. You gave me more joy in 40 years than most people have in their entire lives. You taught me to see the world with different eyes, to value the simple things, to laugh at the small things, to love without expecting anything in return." Tears streamed freely now, but Helen didn't stop reading. "I know the boys weren't what we expected. I know they have problems, that they are selfish, that sometimes they seem to have no heart. I tried to teach them, Helen. I tried to show them what was right, but there are some things you can't teach. There are some things a person has to learn on their own, sometimes the hard way." She turned the page, continuing. "I arranged everything so you would be protected. The house I bought, the money I saved, the instructions for the attorney. I did this because I love you, and because I know the world isn't always kind to those who are different. But I also did it because I believe in you, Helen. I believe you are stronger than you think, that you will be able to live well, even without me, that you will find good people along the way, people who will value you for who you are." Helen looked at Jerry, whose eyes were also moist. He smiled faintly, encouraging her to continue. "If you are reading this accompanied by someone who treats you well, who takes care of you, who makes you smile, then I died in peace, because that was all I wanted for you, that you would never be alone, that you would always have someone to hold your hand when the night grew dark." She took a deep breath before the last lines. "I'll be waiting for you, Helen. In the place where we go when everything here ends, I'll be sitting on a bench somewhere, looking at the sky, saving a spot beside me for you. Don't rush to come, live everything you can live, be happy in every way you can. And when it's time, when you're tired of being here, come find me. We'll dance again like at that summer festival. And this time, I promise not to stumble." She finished reading and fell silent, holding the letter against her chest. The sun had completely set, and the first stars began to appear in the dark sky. The sun world was quiet, respecting that moment. "He loved you very much," Jerry said softly. Helen nodded, still unable to speak. After a while, she put the letter back in the envelope and placed it in the pocket of her dress, close to her heart. "He loved me," she agreed, "and I loved him. I still do. I'll love him forever." The two stayed on the porch late into the night, watching the stars, talking about everything and nothing. Helen told stories of when she was young, of how she met Anthony, of what it was like to raise her children. Even with all the difficulties, Jerry also talked about his life, about the mistakes he had made, about the chances he had lost. They were two stories of pain, but also of hope. Two lives that had found each other at the right time. Months passed, and the house came alive. Jerry fixed the leaky roof, painted the peeling walls, planted a flower garden in the neglected patch. Helen took care of the house inside, cooking, cleaning, singing old songs while she worked. The chickens arrived, then a stray dog that appeared at the gate and decided to stay, then a cat that came along and never left. The once silent house filled with sounds, movement, life. The neighbors, suspicious at first, gradually warmed up. Mr. Johnson became Jerry's friend, the two spending entire afternoons playing dominoes on the porch. Mrs. Davis, the lady next door, adopted Helen as if she were a daughter, teaching recipes, exchanging plant cuttings, keeping her company on quieter afternoons. The small community welcomed these two strangers with a generosity that even big cities struggle to offer. The children appeared a few times in the first months. They came with gifts, with promises, trying to win back what they had lost. But Helen maintained her stance. She received them politely, offered coffee, and chatted about pleasantries. But she never truly let them get close again. The broken trust had not been rebuilt, and perhaps never would be. Over time, the visits became rarer until they stopped completely. The children went on with their lives, and Helen went on with hers. Paths that once ran together now ran parallel, never to cross again. One spring day, almost a year after moving into the house, Helen woke earlier than usual. The sun was still rising, painting the room in golden tones, and she lay there in bed, looking at the ceiling, thinking about her life. She was 63 now. She had been through things no one should have to go through. She had been loved, abandoned, rescued, and loved again. And despite everything, she was happy, genuinely happy. She slowly got up, went to the window and opened the curtains. The backyard was beautiful, with the flowers Jerry had planted in full bloom. The dog slept curled up near the chicken coop, and the cat sat on the fence, observing the world with that typical feline indifference. Tony was on the bed where he always stayed, his button eyes reflecting the morning light. Helen picked up the teddy bear and clutched him to her chest. He no longer held secrets, but he still held memories. Memories of Anthony, of a lifetime of love, of stormy nights when that stuffed animal was her only comfort. She would never part with him. He was the only thing from the past she wanted to keep forever. Jerry appeared at the bedroom door, still sleepy, his hair messy and a pillow crease on his cheek. "Woke up early," he said, yawning. "It's a beautiful day," Helen replied, smiling. "I want to enjoy it." And that's exactly what they did. They had coffee together on the porch, watched the sun climb in the sky, planned what to do in the next few hours. Nothing special, nothing grand, just living, just being there present together, because in the end that's what mattered. Not the money the children had lost, not the inheritance that had gone to charity, not the fights, the resentments, the pains of the past. What mattered was the now. It was the sun on the porch. It was the warm coffee in the mug. It was the companionship of someone who chose to be there. Helen looked at Jerry and smiled, in that way that illuminated everything around her. He smiled back, his eyes full of an affection that needed no words. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For everything. For finding me. For staying. For being my family." Jerry felt his eyes sting, but he didn't let the tears fall. "I'm the one who thanks you, Helen. You saved me as much as I saved you, maybe even more. And there, on that simple porch of a house, in the countryside, two survivors of abandonment found what they had sought their whole lives, a place to belong, a person to love, a reason to continue. The world outside kept spinning, with its injustices, its cruelties, its pains. But inside that yard, surrounded by mango trees, there existed a small piece of peace. A refuge built not with money, but with choices. Choices to be present, choices to care, choices to love when it would have been easier to leave. Anthony, wherever he was, must have been smiling. It had worked out. His Helen was well. She was happy. She was protected, not by the children he raised, but by a stranger who became family, and perhaps that's how things were meant to be. Perhaps family was never about blood. Perhaps it was always about choice, about who stays when everyone else leaves, about who extends a hand when no one else wants to be there. Helen closed her eyes and let the sun warm her face. She was at peace, finally at peace. If this story touched your heart, like, comment, and subscribe. Stories like this deserve to be remembered.